Welcome, everybody. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you are watching from. And welcome to this webinar entitled Change Management and Adoption of Logistics Technology. I am Trey Griggs, founder and CEO of Beta Consulting Group and host of Standing Out, a live show on LinkedIn about sales, marketing, and leadership. We're so excited that you are with us today. Thank you for taking your time to join us for this monumental webinar about change management, specifically regarding technology, which is such a huge discussion with the advent of AI and so many other technologies coming into play. It's good to talk about how to actually manage this with your team. Couple of ground rules real quick before we get started. There is a comment section here in LinkedIn. So go ahead and add your comments or your questions as you go. We'll answer those where we can fit them into the conversation, or at the end of our discussion, we will have a Q&A time during that time. So feel free at any moment to put a question or a comment into those comments, and we will keep track of those and make sure that we get to as many of those as we possibly can. Also, let's just go ahead and practice real quick. Go ahead and tell us where you're watching the webinar from. We'd love to know where you're coming from today in terms of watching the webinar. We have a dynamite panel today. Very excited to welcome them onto the webinar today. So let me go around the horn real quick. We have Daniel Powell, the CEO of Optimal Dynamics, Adam Perlmutter from Metaphora, and Eric Johnson of the Journal of Commerce. Gentlemen, it is great to see all of you. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
We're quiet. We're a little quiet. Nobody's jumping out of their shell just yet, but that's all right. Let's go around real quick and do an introduction. Tell a little bit about yourself and about what you're working on and what you're excited about for this webinar. Daniel, I'm gonna throw it to you first.
Yeah, Daniel Powell, CEO, co-founder of Optimal Dynamics. We're a software company based out of here in New York. We help logistics, truckload operations automate and optimize their businesses.
Excellent. Thank you, Daniel. Appreciate that. All right, Adam, you're up.
Hi, guys. Adam Perlmutter, Director of Industry Consulting at Metaphora. Been in transportation logistics for over 15 years, been with the folks with Metaphora for just over 3 years. I lead our industry consulting practice. So my background is in transportation logistics. Metaphora is a management strategy consulting firm. We specialize exclusively in transportation and logistics. And our sweet spot is tech strategy implementation. So looking forward to chopping it up with these guys here today.
Excellent. Thank you, Adam. And Eric, over to you now.
Hey, everyone. Eric Johnson. I'm Senior Technology Editor at the Journal of Commerce. For those of you who don't know what that is, it's an industry publication focusing on transportation and logistics. I spend 99.9% of my time talking to people in the sort of the software or side of things, both buyer, seller, consultant, anyone who has an influence on buying decision around software. Sort of split my time equally between the domestic and the international side. And I think I'm going on something like close to 20 years as of next month covering the space. So it's been a while.
Wow, that's incredible. Well, thank you for being a part today. And you're also not coming to us from the States. You're the one who's actually staying up for this event. You're out of the country. Where are you right now?
I'm actually in just outside of Delhi, India right now, which is, some people may know I spend a part of every summer here. So not unusual for me to be here, but yeah, that's
awesome. Well, thank you for staying up late for the webinar. We appreciate that. We've got people all around the world watching. Lucas up in Whitefish, Montana. We got Algeria on the call today, Toronto, Detroit, Tuscaloosa, Alabama, Roll Tide, Scottsdale, Arizona, Denver, Colorado, all around the world. So it's truly an international webinar that we're putting on today. And I appreciate you guys being here. This topic is something that is near and dear to my heart as well. I've gone through a lot of organizations in many of my facets of life. Change management is just one of those things that if you get it wrong, it's crippling for an organization, and specifically when it comes to technology. So today we're going to talk about the challenges and the opportunities in transitioning from manual to more technology-driven operations, specifically like AI operations that make decisions for you, which is where we're going to be talking a little bit about that today. So there's a white paper that Optimal Dynamics put out recently to talk about that. We're going to dive into that in just a little bit. And, historically speaking, the truckload sector of transportation has been pretty archaic when it comes to technology and implementing technology. A lot of carriers are still using pen and paper, maybe a spreadsheet, writing things down that way. And the transition has been really difficult in that regard. So we're going to jump right in and talk about that just a little bit. Daniel, I want to kick it to you first. This is a topic that you're obviously very passionate about as well. Talk about your journey and how, what you're doing with Optimal Dynamics, but specifically just this AI generative technology. You're passionate about that and what you're seeing out there.
Yeah, so there's definitely a couple flavors of just levels of technology that are impacting the industry. I think you mentioned with the carrier industry, what they have been investing in is the sort of underlying data infrastructure. And this really gives a platform for companies like Optimal Dynamics to sort of thrive in it. We are a decision automation company. We help companies automate their planning and operational decisions. And so now that we have technology that's at this point today, we can really leverage the data that's sort of sitting in these underlying systems to help them make decisions. However, given that we're now here and everyone's having the, oh shoot, it's here moment, it really now means we need to solve these people and system processes. And now that is the really largest boulder for us to sort of break through to really enable our customers to drive the impact that they're looking for. So while it has been a long journey to get the technology to a place where it is today, you're seeing this with large language models for sort of customer service. You have decision support systems, decision automation systems like OD. Now that you're actually getting a system that's fully automating the human decision, not just a slight augmentation workflow, rethinking about how these people are using the systems is a critical barrier. And so for us right now, you see in the white paper and everything we think about is now that we're here, what does this mean for our customers? More than just how are they going to click our screen, but what is this going to mean for their business? How are they going to think about this? How are they going to be structured? How are they going to be incentivized? And so this is a lot of the thought process that we have to do right now for us as a business.
Yeah, and certainly with trucking companies dealing with operating ratios that continue to climb as their costs continue to go up, certainly trying to find a way to be able to do more with less is really critical. And it's there's a complexity of the transformation process, which we talked about in the white paper. Eric, I want to shoot it to you for just a second. You wrote an article recently for the Journal of Commerce about change management, which we'll put that in the comments so that people can check that out. But talk about your viewpoint from this. You see a lot of companies implementing technology. You cover a lot of technology in this space. Talk about what you highlighted in that article when it comes specifically to change management, the complexity of this.
Yeah, well, so definitely cited the white paper. It actually had a chance to see the white paper, and then something else came up during a set of earnings statements, actually nothing to do with Daniel's business and Metafora's business as well, more on the global forwarding side of things, talking about, and in this case, it was DSV, one of the top 3 or 4 forwarders in the world, talking about investments they had made in AI and what that was going to do to workforce, sort of investment or reduction potentially in the future in certain places where people are doing kind of repetitive tasks, not a lot of value add, just stuff that needs to be done, but is not really like kind of making the 3PL more sticky or kind of helping them stand out in any sort of meaningful way. So for me, it was really a window to kind of explore this idea of how do organizations prepare themselves for those tough conversations. And as I was thinking about what we were going to talk about today, I think there's a temptation. AI is all over the place right now, especially with ChatGPT and the LLMs that Daniel referenced. There's a temptation to think that this is like something that companies have only had to think about over the last few months or last few years. But really, I think this change management piece has been something that organizations in the logistics industry have had to think about for a very long time. It may not have been AI displacing, but it may have been a system that just did things a little bit faster and more accurately than a person could. And now you're seeing it sort of those decisions sort of turbocharged with AI, because the gains can be quite dramatic if it's implemented correctly. So I would suspect that most organizations of any size are thinking about the way, or should be thinking about the way that they are approaching their people in terms of helping them understand why they've invested in things, what that impact will be, and what sort of the future of the organizational structure is. If you haven't been having those conversations prior to sort of this AI buzz period that we're in right now, you certainly need to have formulating a plan around that right now. And I'm not really sure a lot of companies have like a real solid formal, blueprint in place for this. I think they might be thinking about it and knowing that those conversations need to happen, but they're not easy discussions to have, right, at all.
Yeah,
So.
yeah, I would confirm that because one of the stats that stood out to me most in the white paper is the fact that they're only 30%, 3 out of every 10 change management processes are successful. 7 out of 10 are not, and that's pretty drastic. Adam, I want to throw it to you for a minute. In your work with your team at Metaphora, you work with a lot of companies on change management, specifically implementing new technologies and that technology transformation. Why do you think it is that it's such a low percentage of companies that get this right?
Yeah, it's a great question. And we tackle this all the time with our clients and even prospects in our network who we're having conversations with. But when you're transferring from manual operations to tech-driven operations, there's typically a lack of adoption because leadership makes the decision to make the investment to bring this in. And it's not necessarily communicated to seat level why they're making this investment or what this technology is going to do for them. So people are typically pretty hesitant to adopt technology, frankly, because they're skeptical. They don't trust it. People who have been in the industry, and Trey, you mentioned it at the top, pretty archaic industry. Folks who have been in it for a while commonly believe that their institutional knowledge in an ever-changing market is what's driving success for them. I also think there's an underlying component of fear a little bit that to some extent they can be replaced by what the technology brings. So this gap in expectations from leadership down to the seat level, I think, is contributing to that big discrepancy and why it's not working as much as people would like it to. And it also contributes to people working outside of new tools or new technology, contributing to shadow data. And we've seen that the technology, when you roll it out, can only be as powerful as the data that flows through it. So if people are working outside of the tech, if they're keeping manually kept spreadsheets, if they're doing things their old manual way, it's not contributing to the overall success of the new technology that's being implemented.
Yeah, and it's a wholesale change many times when it comes to these transformations, going from pen and paper to using some piece of technology and making sure that it works. I know that I've been a part of organizations that struggled with change. I know I've led really poor change back when I was younger as a youth pastor, even trying to change things in a youth ministry. I messed up change quite a bit as well. I'm curious to the audience to know if they've been a part of a successful transformation or if they've been experienced as well. Share your thoughts in the comments as well as you're thinking about this. But let's dig in a little bit. There's a discomfort in moving away from familiar manually driven operations, Adam, as you had referred to, to move over to the modern technologies. Daniel, I'm going to kick it back to you. Can you share some specific challenges that you faced in transitioning from manual to technology driven operations and what you're seeing in your chair today?
One of the big pieces that we like to hone in on, and I think it's really important for everyone, it's very easy to talk about AI and talk about just that in a general light, but actually thinking about what decisions you're making and decisions you're impacting are incredibly important to the success of the change management. So if you take OD, let's say we're focusing in on dispatching and load allocation decisions. Once you're actually at that position where you're truly understanding what is being changed, what's being impacted, then it really starts to sort of working through the change management roadmap. And one of the big pieces that can go wrong is it's a bit of a weakest link problem. Any missing link of the sort of overall change of the business can put the entire project at risk. So making sure that you have future state and current state roles mapped out properly, making sure that you have the right KPIs in place to ensure the success of these individuals, what they're incentivized to do. If you talk about shadow data, users now should be incentivized to think about good data entry, not how many dispatches, for example, they're operating in a day. And so I think it really is important that you actually get down to the very specifics of what you're changing, who you're changing, what is their future state, what are they going to be doing after the fact, how are you going to have support from the executive level, how are the team members to be incentivized so that this stays, right? It's not like we just have a deploy and an excitement and then it kind of goes away because no one's incentivized to use the new processes. And so I think it really takes this sort of end-to-end process to be done correctly, or one of the links will break and fall away.
Yeah, that's a good segment there about expectations. I know in the white paper they outline basically a 5-step process for really managing the change, and one of those is communicating vision. Being able to say this is where we're at today, this is where we're headed, and making sure that people have buy-in on that. Incredibly critical. Adam, I'm going to go back to you real quick. What are some of the challenges, specific challenges that you've seen clients face in this transition? Maybe something to warn those that are watching today. Just things to look out for, to some landmines to steer clear of.
Yeah, it's a great question. So oftentimes we see people think of bringing on new technology as, okay, we're adding a certain capability, and they're not exactly taking into consideration how it will impact the broader business. So when prepping for change, you have to think about what other components of the business are going to be impacted: roles and responsibilities, compensation and incentives, processes, KPIs. How are we going to change how people are going to operate on a day-to-day basis with this technology to get the desired behaviors, to ultimately maximize the outputs from the technology? And I think most people just sort of skip over that and they say, we're going to bring in this technology. It checks a box that we need. We're going to communicate it. This is what it's going to do for us, and just hope that things are going to work itself out without taking into consideration all the other overlapping components of their business that are inherently going to be affected by how people operate on a daily basis.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I would imagine that for most people working these jobs that Eric, you talked about earlier, maybe just doing repetitive tasks or things that aren't necessarily major value adds, is there just a major fear among staff in general for their job? And how can a leader really embrace upon that? I'm just going to open that up to anybody. What are some tips to help leaders really embrace this? Because their job might actually be affected. You might not need them in that role anymore. You may need to transition somewhere else, or they may need to just look for another opportunity. I know it's a tough subject. What's the advice for leaders as you think about working with people and just some of the fears that they have in those roles?
Go ahead, Dan.
Sure. For me, like alignment and clarity is, I think, a critical item, and the fact that the executive support is there. We have seen customers that the executive support's not there. There might have been all alignment, but the first bump in the road, they get kicked off course, and then it falls around. So for leaders, having that clarity of message, having that alignment of the team, and making sure that they can be behind it, I think is incredibly important. Because without it, people will lose the trust. They could feel disposable, especially as you're going through the tools. You're saying, hey, this is what it does, and we're not sure what you're going to do next. If you know exactly what they're going to be in part of this new process, there's not much fear. It's a career conversation rather than a career, derail. And so I think that alignment and clarity of message is critical for leaders within these organizations that are applying these changes and applying them for potentially the first time in, years. It's not maybe not an organization that deals with this on a continual basis. So it's really important that they have clarity of message and alignment within their teams.
Yeah, and to piggyback on what you said and what Adam said, Ryan Schreiber made the comment that he's consistently observed that the success of technology implementation lies effectively communicating the why behind the change to employees. That why is really critical, that people understand why are we actually doing this. It's not just for fun, because it's not fun. It can be a very difficult process from time to time, but the why is really important when it comes to that. Talk about economic risk. So maybe a leader might be a little apprehensive to make changes because they might be thinking about either lost time or downtime or customer transition or whatever it is. Talk about some of those a little bit. And Eric, I'm going to throw it to you just in what you're seeing. What are some of your thoughts around leaders and their maybe apprehension to change when they kind of have to? It's going to happen.
Yeah, so I think, let me sort of tackle two things related to that question. So I think it's important right now to understand that technology obviously has been sort of washing over the logistics industry in waves over the last 3 decades. So I think most organizations are used to understanding and having some sort of conversation with their teams about what the technology is going to mean from a headcount perspective. And for the most part, the technology has been enabling. It's not been replacing. Obviously, there are cases where it replaces, but we have more people working in logistics now than we did 10 years ago and 20 years ago and 30 years ago. So I think the way I'm viewing sort of technology and today, and especially sort of the more automation end of the technology spectrum, is, for me, it's about controlling costs. It's not necessarily yet about replacing people. It's about how do I do more with the people I have? And it's not necessarily more volume or freight, more markets. Sometimes it's the same amount of volume and the same amount of freight is more complex, and there's more things to do. And so you need those people to be doing more. So it's really about augmenting their sort of capacity or bandwidth each day right now. Now, in the future, I really think it's incumbent upon leaders to say, from, that economic part of this is, at some point, there's going to be some hard decisions made, because the technology is going to be so good that we can't justify having people doing some of the things that it will do, whether it's that repetitive work or some of the more advanced stuff that Daniel and a whole bunch of other people are doing right now, where you're actually automating decision making, not just the things that feed into a human making a decision. So, staff these days, they are so well educated about what's going on in the market, right? Like they know that AI is out there. They know that technology is there to sort of make their companies more efficient and make them more productive. And that always means their job is going to change, or it could be replaced, right? So the more you try to sort of obscure that reality over time from them, the more they're going to resent it, honestly. So obviously no one likes to lose their job. No one likes to have their job materially changed without them wanting that to happen. But I think a leader who's upfront and honest about what all of this stuff means to the organization over time is going to be looked upon a lot better than one that was trying to say, no major changes, we're keeping everybody. This is just making us bigger and better. And then, 3 years down the line, there's a wholesale cutting of a department because it's just not necessary. So
those are tough conversations to have for sure, but I think you're right. Facing it head on is definitely important. We're going to pause for just a minute. Mustafa, we're going to get that link working for you in the comments. And just a reminder, if you have questions or comments about this process, what you've experienced, or maybe you're heading into that, make sure you put them in the comments and we will address those as we continue throughout the webinar. Let's transition just a little bit to some real world examples. And Daniel, I'm going to throw it to you on this one, and Adam as well, with the work that you guys are doing. What are some specific technologies that you guys have maybe in your own companies adopted, and talk about just the process that worked, some things that worked, maybe some things that didn't, just whatever from your personal experience. And Adam, I'll throw it to you on this one to start off.
Yeah, so we've worked with clients across a whole suite of technology tools. Most recent example, we worked with a client in implementing a new TMS, and they were coming from a place where most of their processes were manual. A lot of manually kept spreadsheets, a lot of institutional knowledge, and we helped them bridge that gap by bringing on this new technology in the form of a TMS. So, as I mentioned earlier, we took the broader approach of taking a look at how this would impact their entire business, from roles and responsibilities. We refined processes, defined KPIs to drive adoption and the right behaviors. And the one component that we haven't really touched on that is crucial in tying it all together is reinforcement of change. So after change has gone live, how do you continue to monitor progress and recognize when people are doing the right things, calling out those wins, and just reinforcing the change that you're trying to make, so that it sticks and it's not just a flavor of the month type change, but something that's going to stick with the organization for a long time.
Yeah, and having those measurable KPIs, that's one of the keys that we noted in the white paper, is that making sure you have some indicators to say that we're making progress. This is where we're headed. Perfection's not the goal, but making progress is the goal. I think that's really important to have that. Daniel, shifting over to you, what are some technologies that you've either adopted within OD, and talk about that process, or just how you're working also with some of your customers just to make that process as smooth as possible?
Yeah, so especially for our customers, I mean, we adopt technology all the time. We're not running a logistics network, but obviously lots of our customers are. It's a lot of the things that Adam talked about with implementations with our tech partners. For us, we work with a lot of tech partners, but there are a lot of data ingestion sources, and so these are pieces of technology that our customers have been using in a more manual, getting information from their ELD, pulling information from their TMSs to then make a decision. So a lot of the change management components that Adam's talking about with their partner technology companies is what we have to do ourselves with our customers. Making sure that we have roles and responsibilities identified, making sure that we have the right implementation plans, making sure that we have the right executive stakeholders in place, and then making sure that it's staying used. I think that, long run is incredibly important. Making sure that when a person just sees one issue, that they don't get derailed for the rest of the use of the technology. It's one of the reasons why they're there. Hopefully the technology enables them to do more human issues. So we deal with it every single day with all of our customers. We have customers at different stages, some that have been using the tool for years, some that are going through this process right now. But it's all very similar. All the companies have similar types of attributes. They're all different. Each map has to be different for each customer, but they're all humans working jobs with roles that are changing a little bit. So making sure we're having those honest, upfront conversations about what they do now, what they're doing in the future, how they're going to behave with the tool, and then working with them hand in hand out. This isn't also something that we can just hand them a document and then wipe our hands with. It takes that continual reinforcement by ourselves. It takes continual reinforcement by management, by executive management, for the long run before these are kind of cruising as a daily tool that is just, used without any sort of bumps in the road.
Yeah, and one thing I'm hearing on a regular basis is this need for structure or a systematic approach in that regard. Adam, I want to throw this to you. How many people struggle, do you think, with this? How many leaderships and how many teams struggle with this just because they maybe just don't know what they don't know, or they don't have a clear structure in place to follow, kind of a checklist or a guideline, or maybe an outside voice to help them through this process? I imagine for a lot of these companies, it might be the first time they've gone through a major transformation change like this.
Absolutely. So again, you have to consider the changes that's going to be company-wide, how it's going to impact your entire business. So we strongly recommend breaking it down into different components of the journey. So preparing for the change, managing through the change, and then also reinforcing the change. And there are discrete activities that go in with each of these stages of the change management journey. And it's important to communicate throughout the life cycle of the journey, making sure you're bringing everyone along for the ride. And as you mentioned, the quote from Ryan, explaining the why. So up front, when you're prepping for change, you want to really instill the what's in it for me messaging with the end user to ensure that there's adoption. As you're managing through the change, be empathetic, understand that their role, their processes, their responsibilities, it's all changing, and change is scary. So be empathetic with that. So managing through the change, it's important to explain that why. And then with reinforcing the change at the tail end, you just want to drive home the end behaviors. So ultimately, you want your people to be able to do more with less. So you're upskilling them. So it's important to reiterate that investment is not just for the business, but it's for them professionally. So if they learn how to use a new tool or technology, they're expanding their skill set. That's going to help them along their professional journey along the way as well.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that the change often takes a lot longer than people initially think when they start out. It's almost like building technology. It always takes twice as long and costs 3 times as much as you think it's going to take. Having a realistic expectation on how long this change is actually going to take place. And obviously it depends on what the change is, but just having an expectation that it's going to take a long time to get there would probably be a good piece of advice, I'd imagine, as people go through this process.
For sure.
Yeah. Talk about, go ahead, jump in.
Can I just add something real quick?
Yeah, please, go ahead.
As you might imagine, I get to talk to, one of the fun parts of my job is I get to talk to an insane number of software providers, right? And also users. I think it's important to step back for a second and realize not every single piece of technology that is sold in the market and that is going to be bought by organizations is transformative in the way that wholesale change management is needed. So, Adam's example, a company that has no TMS and is all of a sudden has a TMS, that's a major change. That's a transformation. Things are going to change materially in someone's day to day. If a company with a very sophisticated TMS decides to incorporate a piece of data from a visibility provider, that may make some person's job or some team's job a little bit easier and may give them a little bit better data, but you don't need a 6-week course about how their job is going to change by using that technology. So it's important to realize what needs to induce sort of a change management process and what will be embraced most likely by employees because it just makes their life a lot better and easier.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think one of the reasons why we're having these conversations in such earnest today with the sort of umbrella of AI are the advent of decision automation type technology.
Yeah.
Is that it's not just providing insights to a user that's making their job slightly different. I agree with that. So we want to have a thoughtful plan, but we're not blowing up the company. We're not reorging the company. We're not reinventing who they are. It's, Eric has a little better data today. He's going to make better decisions. We're going to run a better operation.
I call this,
yeah.
I call this that these types of technologies like SEAL, not visibility necessarily, but the ones where, there's existing systems that the company is happy with or they've made an investment in and they're sort of forced to be happy with it. And then something comes in along and makes it a little bit better. It's like the SEAL Team 6. Like the system goes in, it dips out in the dark of night and no one knows any better, but suddenly everything runs a little bit better than it did, before the system was.
Yep.
So like there's all sorts of different flavors of this. So it's really important to identify how much your team is going to be impacted before you go through this, like, hey, everyone, there's going to be a lot of change over the next 3 months. Like we're going through a massive Microsoft migration because we're two companies that have merged last year. That is one where you really need to message exactly what is going to be saved and what is not, and how the system's going to work afterwards, right? If we add another vendor that's giving us like a little bit better data, I don't think you need a big campaign around that. So
yeah, really recognizing the scale of it, I think, is important to know. Is it optimization or is it transformation? Wouldn't it be great if they were all those black ops in the background, just making everything run better? That'd be so much easier to do. In my experience with change management, I'm going to share a couple of things real quick. It's so critical that you have buy-in from the team. So it's one thing to communicate it, but it's another thing to actually get them to buy in and believe it. That's where the why comes into place. And that's where I think it's also really important to understand who the power brokers are in your company. In every organization, you have the people who are the ones that kind of get everybody going in the same direction, if you will, the ringleaders, if you will, of the organization. It's good to get them on board. It's good to have them on your side whenever you're trying to make that change. The last thing you want to do when you're doing change management is to create enemies, especially the ones who are the most vocal or have the most influence in your organization. So I've noticed that getting buy-in from your team, especially the people who can get buy-in from everybody else, is really critical, and understanding your people in that way is really important. So I've noticed that as a BCI. Go ahead.
There's the opposite too, right? Like anytime there's a big change, there's always the people, and I've probably been this from time to time. There's always the people who are like, oh my God, I can't believe we're making this change. Like, what is the point of this? It just seems, so you have to get past those, and they may have a big voice in your organization, right? So you have to get past those people, figure out a way to like either muzzle them or get them on board, right? So.
Yeah, hopefully get them on board. Muzzling might be a challenge and look awkward walking around the office that way. No, but you're right. There's a certain degree of knowing your people that I think is really critical when it comes to this aspect as well. That makes it much easier in that regard. So I would just throw that out there, that getting everybody on the same page would be good. We got a couple of thoughts I want you guys to respond to. So Warren had mentioned earlier that what he loves about some of the new technology is it allows people to do things that do more of the things that only humans can do. For example, like talking to drivers and actually having a real conversation. He made a comment earlier just about the decision-making stuff we talked about, Daniel, with that, getting some of those things off the plate and spending more time with drivers. Because, drivers out there by themselves, a lot of them just need somebody to talk to, or they need some help on something like that. Talk about the power of some of the new AI technologies to make that possible, where people can do more human-centric activities as opposed to just some of the stuff that doesn't need to happen. Daniel, I'm going to throw it to you real quick.
So for us personally, we automate 2 core operational decisions for our customers, which are load acceptance, load allocation, and then dispatch automation. So these are repetitive tasks, difficult tasks, but repetitive tasks that are done hundreds of times a day. It takes a lot of time to do it manually. And humans just aren't set up for those types of tasks. What they are set up are personal issues, customer service problems, driver management problems. And so now they actually have more time to win more business, work with their team members, their drivers. And so I think that's a lot of the messaging when we talk to our end users, which is we're going to be moving you away from the tasks that computers are naturally good at, and move you to the tasks that only you can do. Because it is true. It's true that only they can have that personal conversation with the driver and understand what's going on with their family and their kids and have that human connection. If there's something going wrong, figuring out what's going wrong and how to make their life better. Allow the systems to do the tasks, hundreds or thousands of times a day in terms of, specific operational execution problems, and give them, 6 hours a day to focus on people problems. Because right now it's completely inversed. We have the people doing the computer tasks all day with a sliver of when they can putting in the extra effort to try to solve the human problems. And so alleviating that time so that they can spend time with their humans is I think, really critical in terms of what these types of technologies can be for our customers.
Yeah,
I think that's a great point. Data doesn't have emotions. They can make the decisions and then leave the relationship building and the empathy to the humans to drive those relationship builds, so that when people are working, it's a stressful job. Transportation logistics is the most stressful. So if we can take some of that emotional component out of the decisioning and use that to build relationships with drivers, with customers, internally with stakeholders, that's really where the impact is for people.
Yep. And that's one of the main keys that we talk about in the white paper that people can read, is really putting a priority on the impact of what it has for people. And Eric, you had mentioned, we talked earlier about people maybe being afraid of their job or what they're doing, but also I think there's the upside too of how can we sell this to them to say, you can do more of the things you actually enjoy, especially if you like talking to people, for example, or you like solving some problems. The exceptions will become what people focus on and work on, more value-driven opportunities there. I think it's important to really prioritize that and understand that. Eric, I'm curious, in your work with that, what strategies you've seen that worked out really well, or what tips that you would have for the audience in regards to the change management that maybe we haven't discussed yet.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I don't think there's a whole lot of. Maybe in academia there's some sort of case studies around this, or business school case studies around this, but you don't see a lot of software vendors. That's what made the white paper quite interesting, because you don't see a lot of software vendors like having, case studies around customers who did effective change management. It's more about like, what did the tool do? What did it do? Bottom line, So there's sort of a limited, I would say, library of knowledge around this, other than people like Adam and Metaphora and the like, who are sort of in this every day and have the sort of knowledge around what those things look like. I sort of go back to, people want to do something that's interesting every day. So if the messaging, I think Adam's point about like selling this as a way to, improve their career rather than as something that's sort of coming to get them. Not everyone is going to believe that, right? Some people are going to believe like, yeah, you're just telling me that, but in actuality, you want to replace me because it's cheaper, right? But if you're an organization, you should be wanting your people to be upwardly ambitious. And part of that in today, whether you like it or not, and ironically, since I cover technology, I would say I don't like it all that much. You have to be constantly reinventing yourself, and you have to constantly be understanding what technology is and what it means to your professional and personal life. And so I think there's a strategy here where companies can message this around, you're building essentially your personal brand within the company. Whether that brand ends up staying with this company or not, you are going to be stronger for having been exposed to some of the stuff that we're investing in. Yeah. So other than that, like, not everyone is going to believe that. It's just the fact of the matter. But those
Right.
who do are really going to be super valuable employees at that point.
Yeah. And I think that from a leadership perspective, the true visionaries can paint the picture for the team. They can paint the picture for the business and really tie it back to where people fit in. So, hey, in this future state that we're making this investment in, that we're upskilling you towards, this is where you fit in. And like for the longest time, service was the differentiator in transportation. We're going to be there on time. Now we're arming you with data, insights to be a better partner with your customers, with your carriers, with whoever you work with. So I think that's really important to just communicate. Again, going back, we've said this a bunch of times, communicating the why and painting the vision as clearly as possible to let people know this is how you stand to benefit and this is where you fit in to the whole scheme of things. So technology is going to be brought in. This is what success will look like for you.
And on the role change, I think it's really important to sort of, they're talking about painting the picture. It's incredibly true. When you're even getting down to the trust building of the application, it's amazing what can derail the application is really what they should now be focusing in on. Oh, the system isn't handling this real edge case today. Yeah, I know that's what you should really be solving. But it solved the other 80% of decisions perfectly okay. But messaging that is incredibly important because if you message it as this tool is going to change everything, it's going to do everything, we'll figure this out passively, you're going to get a huge opposition. They're going to find one crack in what the application's doing and hit the brakes. But making sure that they're empowered to say, hey, yeah, that's what my job is. That's part of my new job now. I'm going to make sure the data is correct. I'm going to solve these really hard edge case problems that before I just try to get to, but now I can actually do it and have a really solid outcome at the end of the day. And that's not a blocker to the technology. That is part of my job because I can do this and no one can. No one else can.
Yeah.
That's
I love it, Daniel.
So, we always tend to think of technology as like solving problems, but what it really does is it unlocks a new set of problems that you didn't even know existed because you were too busy with the other problems. I hadn't thought about it that way. It's a great point. So that's another probably way to sell it is like, we're not going to be perfect next month. We're just going to be imperfect in a different set of ways that we will need people to help solve. So.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's one of the keys also in the white paper is perfection is not the goal. And I love that what you uncovered there, Daniel, that you're going to find new problems once you eliminate these others that you're focused on all the time. And the onus really is on companies to get good at change management and to practice it because the speed at which technology is changing continues to accelerate. And so change management is going to occur more rapidly. More technology is going to be introduced to make sure you're keeping up with things. So I think the onus is really on them. And one thing that I found, I heard a company do this one time, and I thought this was really, really helpful because people are just so prone to what they're comfortable with or what they know. I had one company say that when they implemented a new piece of technology, they basically made a deal with their team and said, listen, for 1 month, just 1 month, we're going to shut this one off. We're going to use this one. It's not going to impact your pay. And we're going to see at the end what the difference is. And if it's better, we're going to use that. And if it's worse, we're going to figure out what is best. And making that deal with them and just saying, hey, this is something that we're going to come in with together and it's not going to impact you negatively, made an impact on everybody actually using it. Because if you put in a new piece of technology that's similar to one they already have, people always default to what they're comfortable with. It's just human nature. So just some of the strategies I've heard around companies that have done a good job of handling the transformation, communicating well, making deals with their team and inviting them in has been really good. Eric, you want to say something?
Yeah, I that's so interesting you brought that up. That's like kind of like a big A/B test, right? Like instead of kind of an isolated one, it's like a whole team-wide. I remember very distinctly, like 5 years ago, going to a conference, a CIO conference. I think it was Ryder. If someone from Ryder corrects me that it's not them, sorry. If I'm wrong, it was a long time ago. Ryder said when they had implemented a new piece of technology, they connected year-end bonuses to people actually using it the requisite amount that they had invested in. That's a pretty extreme, radical, I would say, sort of approach to making sure you get adoption. It's not exactly like the carrot approach, but there are probably different strategies that you can take, and some of them are going to be different. Some of them are going to be it depends again on the system. Like, is it something that like literally they just need to take the medicine and learn how to use, or is it something transformational where you need to bring them along for the ride? You can't just force them onto the wagon.
Yeah. And that removes the fear element too a little bit. If they feel like they could actually win with this as opposed to losing, that changes the whole dynamic in their mind. Daniel, you want to say something real quick?
Yeah, I think I'm just piggybacking on something you said a little bit of like having companies go through the motions in practice. I also put the ball on providers as well to understand what their technology means for customers. A customer is not going to know exactly what a certain technology means exactly for their business. And so educating them through the points of the engagement is critical. If you just ask the customer, how do you see this fit in? And expecting them to know exactly how it's going to happen, you're going to probably end up with a failure project. But working in collaboration with the customer to say, hey, they know their business way better than we do, obviously, way better than any external party does. But we know our technology better than they do. And so it really does take a collaborative working approach to actually make sure that there's positive outcome. And so if vendors aren't coming in with that sort of mindset of, hey, we know our technology best, but we're going to learn from our customers to figure out how it maps to them, I think it's going to be really hard. And I think if a company said, hey, we did all the motions, we practiced this, we applied technologies, we've done this 10 times, that 11th provider comes in just saying, hey, you guys figured out because you know it, it's going to be a pretty difficult situation.
That's a good point. It's almost like we need some industry standard buckets. Like this is transformative. This is just optimization. This is like black ops. Nobody needs to know about it. Almost like that. And each provider needs to know where their technology fits, and help their customer go through that. So
Eric, if you look at, I was going to say, if you look at the work that Metaphora does, there's probably, unfortunately, 10,000 shades of gray in there. That's why each one is like its own fingerprint. And it's probably why, companies like us or Metaphora can't just create one blueprint, hand it out, and then call it a day. It's there's so many similarities between customers, but I have not seen two that are exactly the same.
That's just the reality. That's accurate. So every business is completely different. So we have to go in with a clean slate. We've seen successes, we've seen failures. You kind of look like this. You have goals that resemble this, and you just have to try to really get to the core principles of what the company is going for. Ultimately, we always like to go in and take a look at if a company has values or like a mission statement or something like that, and tie initiatives back into what they're trying to be as a business to align with their values. So that helps us connect with stakeholders. It helps us align with leadership. And it helps us set and manage expectations for what success looks like for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's pause for a minute. We're going to take a couple of questions from the audience real quick, and then we're going to finish after that with a little bit of looking ahead, the future of technology and what people can expect. So the first question comes to us from Hassan. He says, what specific obstacles have you observed as a result of implementing the latest AI trends and improving business decision-making processes? There's a second question on there as well, considering the cost effectiveness of deploying tools via the aforementioned approach and the appeal of complementary tools to companies. Do you envision any potential shortcomings or failures for the emerging AI technologies in the near future? I'll let you guys take one or both of those who would like to tackle what specific obstacles have you observed. Adam, this might be a good one for you.
This is a loaded question. Thanks for kicking it off here. So specific obstacles, again, understanding what AI is going to bring to the business. So putting in a bucket like, hey, this is what we expect the technology to do. And then this is how that's going to impact your role, your responsibilities. And then here are the KPIs that we're going to track for you, employee, to drive the right behaviors when using the technology. It's not all encompassing, but we want to just draw a line in the sand, here are expectations so that we can manage to it. I think that's the biggest trend is like, hey, how do we parse through what is going to change? So as Eric mentioned, like, is this going to be a full transformation? Is this just going to be a bit of a tweak to what we're doing today? So getting a grasp on what the change is going to be, and then setting expectations with users to drive the right behaviors.
It seems like it'd be a good thing to have an outside voice because you just might not know. It's like running this by somebody and say, "Hey, how transformative do you think this is going to be, or how simple is this going to be?" And maybe getting an outside perspective is helpful because I can just imagine this might feel overwhelming for companies and for leaders that just haven't gone through a lot of change.
And I think one thing that can get sort of the ahas at the end, or the gotchas at the end, is really that future state mapping of like the people, processes, and data too. If you think about AI as a broad bucket, but at the end of the day, systems have to solve specific problems. Those specific problems are going to have specific data requirements. If you go through all this organizational change management, but you haven't done sort of like habitual change management, which is, oh, I sort of enter all my data at the end of the day, you'll find that you're going to be ready to deploy, and now you have to break human bad habits. And so making sure you can identify these at the right time means that we can start with sort of changing these habits 3 months before go live, so that once we're there, we can have this efficient deployment of the technology versus it's here. Remember, we're changing processes. Changing processes really benefit from momentum. People will fall back into their way real easily. And so making sure you can reduce the amount of chances that happens upstream, I think can really drive to project success. Because
that's good.
Big bam, you're there, and then it just falls on its face, and we have to try to do this again. It's now 5 times harder the next time around.
That's a good call to note that sometimes bad habits can make technology adoption pretty difficult if they're not using things the correct way or in a process that actually works with the technology. That could be pretty overwhelming. That's true. Okay, next question comes from Abdel Malik. Hopefully I got that correct. Thanks for the question. How much user input should be given in decision automation systems? Is giving more liberty to the user to make decisions with key insights and recommendations a good strategy for smoother change management without compromising the power of the tech? Who wants to take that? Eric, you want to go with that?
I'll jump into this one just because I had a very interesting conversation with someone who's in automation on the truckload side, and I asked him this question. It's like, okay, how do you actually get people across the line, right? Like, how do you convince them that the automated decision based on the data that the system is using is actually better than the decision that they're making? Do you put them in the front seat and they're driving, but there's actually someone in the passenger seat, like in driver's ed, who's taking control of the car? Do you give them a dummy steering wheel and they're just like not doing anything at all? Or are they just you just tell them you're in the back seat, you are not touching the steering wheel or the accelerator or brake? And he's like, look, end of the day, they're going to be in the back seat at some point. The faster you get them in the back seat, the quicker, the more painful it is up front, but the less painful it is over time, right? So, I mean, this kind of goes back to like leveling with people at a certain point. Now, again, you can't do that with everything. You have to be very, very choosy about this. But if you're really confident in the system that you've invested in, and you're confident in the decision making and the data, as Daniel has said a million times, the data to support those decisions, then you just have to put them in the back seat, right, and let them handle the things that are out of scope. So.
Right. And I can say I'm a small company, I'm a beta consulting group, super small. I'm thinking about how can I automate things? How can I get junk off of my people's plate? How can my team be more productive and more satisfied at the end of the day? And I'm like this is for everybody to really think about this. How can we get some of the junk off and just get them in the back seat so that they can focus on something else, make a phone call, whatever it's going to be. So I think that's critical. Any other comments on that?
Well, I think Adam may have one as well. For the technology, we think it's really important to have a happy path if something goes wrong. So it's not the primary flow for the user, which is, hey, I have a new screen that's sort of like my TMS, that's like a small optimizer. I work through it, it's a new experience, but the happy path isn't me doing things manually. We really have to do a shift, which is, hey, now you're following this system's decision, an optimal dynamics decision. But we do really think it's important that there is a happy path if things go wrong, because that creates a blockage. And we don't want to have an environment where a user gets fully blocked and then they regress back into their old habits. And so making sure that they do have a path forward is key. We also do work a lot with our end customers to get their feedback into the systems. While we aren't doing it to make sure that there's preferences, we take those in a little bit less. There's structural rules that we have to make sure that work more often. And so there is a real collaborative approach outside of just the platform, but in the calibration to these systems with our customers to find that out. But the faster you can move into a state where you trust the decisions will allow the systems to work at their full capacity. But you do have to have happy paths that users can take control of the systems when things, maybe go awry.
Yeah, I like that comment, Daniel. And I think it also goes to selecting a technology vendor. If a vendor can't really explain to you how they're going to walk you through this change, even if it's small or really big, then they might not know how to do it as well. And that might make a little bit bigger headache on your end whenever you're implementing that technology. Great question. Thank you for that one. Next question from John Arendt. He says, how do you prevent the dispatchers from blaming the technology when drivers are unhappy with advances in NLP? Is it possible for the system to explain assignments to drivers? Who wants to take that one?
Probably in my camp. We've actually had conversations. It goes into the why of a decision, which we spend more time thinking about how do you get a system to say why it did something rather than enhancing, how optimally the end solve is. I do think there's actual opportunities to have NLP extract data from core decisions to make more sort of human explainability. When you have models like we do, there is a lot of rich data to pull from and actually have NLPs use to then build human English reasons. While this doesn't look profitable, this moved a driver into a positive region and service to major customer. Oh, that's easy. I get that. Yeah, okay. We lost $20, but that all makes sense. I would do that if someone told me that, versus having to sort of always say, hey, there's a bigger picture, it might be doing this. And so we actually are starting to do a little research about how an NLP can extract sort of the decisions so that it is explained into a more pure, plain English format for users that they can kind of get the behind the scenes activity.
Yeah. And as we mentioned earlier, it's going to be hard to nuance that with emotion or feeling because it doesn't really have a lot of that. Maybe it will at some point. Maybe it'll gravitate to that point where it can understand that and incorporate that, but not so much right off the bat. Last question. This one's easy. This one's for me. Clark, yes, there will be a recording that you can share with your team. So thanks so much for watching on that. I appreciate that. We're going to end with this. We got about 3 minutes left, so 45 seconds for each of you. If you could just describe briefly what you think the future of some of this technology and logistics is going to look like. Daniel, I'll start with you. Just real quick, what do you think is coming down the path?
Probably a lot of what we talked about today. It's the advent of automating the decision. I think I was on another webinar where we talked about this. This is technology that's finally at a place, which some are today, where we're now automating the core human decision. I think for me, that is the most exciting thing that comes next. There's going to be a lot of supporting technology that's required. There's still going to be impactful or maybe even more impactful. But for me, what I find the most exciting are the new advents of technology that are actually automating the core human decision.
Yeah. Eric, how about you? What do you see?
So I'll get to my answer in a question in a sec because it relates to what I'm going to say. One thing that's interesting is we didn't talk at all about the customer's customer, right? And what they think of what the technology does. So in terms of change management, if you're able to message to your team, hey, by the way, we've made our customers' experience a lot better as a result of this, that goes some way in
that's a great point. Yeah.
Them adopt something that they may have been reticent to adopt. And so I would say for me, the thing that I'm expecting to happen over the next, it's already well in progress and I expect it to happen in an accelerated way over the next year or two, is just all the interactions that we have, companies I cover have with their customers are going to be so much more automated. And the customers are going to be okay with that. They're not going to reflexively recoil because the system is talking to them. They're actually going to start to understand that it's faster, quicker, more efficient for the system to talk to them.
Yeah, nobody stopped using Amazon because their customer service is completely automated, which works really fast. The one time I had to send something back, it got done in 30 seconds. And to my satisfaction, I wasn't upset at all. So I agree with you, Eric, on that point. Adam, how about you? What do you see?
Yeah. Removing tactical, emotional decisioning from users, enabling them with insights, with data to build stronger relationships with their customers. So again, the relationship piece is not going anywhere. In fact, it's going to get stronger because all the time and energy and effort spent on tactically executing and that come along with all the hundreds of problems that pop up day to day, that gets removed. So then you can focus on the personal element and really expand relationships with customers.
Yeah. And, or like you talked about, maybe have just better relationships in your circle, with your family, with your friends, like that kind of the thing, which seems to be lacking sometimes because we're working so hard on all these small, kind of somewhat meaningless, tactical problems that we have. So that's possible as well. I'm going to keep it really simple. The one thing I'm looking forward to is my AI personal assistant. So when I put a conference on my calendar, it books my flight, my hotel, and everything. I don't have to think about it. That stuff's coming. I can't wait. I'm looking forward to all these new things that are going to make our lives even easier than they are today. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being on the webinar today. Adam, Eric, Daniel, thank you so much. For those that are watching, thank you for watching. Make sure you follow these guys on LinkedIn. Follow Eric, especially on Twitter. He's a good follow in that regard. And make sure you check out the white paper from Optimal Dynamics talking about transformational change. It's so critical that each and every company pays attention to this and starts to think about this and get this down so that they can be successful and make that 30% number jump way up to 70, 80, 90, 100% in terms of successful transformations. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you guys for watching. We'll see you guys soon.
Thank you.
Take care, guys.